I started C-Suite Coach in 2015. We're coming up on 6 years, celebrating our 6 years in August, and I'm so grateful that for the last 6 years, what we have focused on, our North Star that we say when we get up and wake up every day and get our day started, we're thinking about one thing, and that's how do we make career advancement and equity in the workplace a reality for all. So we have always had this as the core of our mission and everything that we've created, and that's taken different iterations. We've primarily worked with Fortune 500 companies and other large organizations to provide coach staffing programs for them, where we hire coaches and place them to work with Black and Brown talent within organizations and also with external communities. We've also done diversity, equity, and inclusion program management and design, as well as offered content creation services for audiences that are a part of our community. We can go to the next slide, please. And so here's just a quick overview of our services, but what I'm so excited to also share is, we've had these opportunities, and we can go to the next slide, to work with trusted organizations like the Googles of the world. We have someone from Google with us here today, really excited to talk about it. But we most recently launched our C-Suite Coach Network. Jackie will drop the link in the chat for you all, where for the first time, not just working with Fortune 500 companies, we are allowing the same coaches who I always say I would let any of these coaches be my individual coach, coach me. These same coaches now also work with individuals, and there are packages available for 3 different career levels. And we have curated 10 coaches of color, diverse backgrounds who work with Black and Brown professionals to make sure that we're leveling up in our careers, that we have the resources that we need to navigate through our careers and achieve the success we desire. So the same coaches that we would, that we've been working with and will bring on to any of our Fortune 500 companies are now also available for you. So I encourage you, if you are in any sort of situation, like some of the situations we're going to talk about today, where you've been with a difficult manager, or you are having any challenges at work, or simply you're looking to reconnect to your purpose and plan for your next level of your career, that you explore our site and you check out our offerings with the 10 amazing coaches that we have on the site. So I'll stop sharing screen right now, and we can talk a little bit about why we're here today. And I want to introduce our esteemed panelists, including one of the coaches who is on the C-Suite Coach Network, and that is Robert Hilliard. So as a coach, Robert helps improve communication, build effective teams, and leverage his experience in his career to overcome a wide range of challenges. He's worked with leaders from all organizational levels, from frontline supervisors all the way to C-level executives, and he focuses on helping these executives get better results with less stress, okay? And improving their ability to lead consciously and leverage collective intelligence of their teams. He does this by helping them discover the space where leadership, diversity, and inclusion and organizational culture converge. So I'm really excited that we have him with us today. And again, I mentioned you'll be hearing from Robert today. He is also a coach on the C-Suite Coach Network. So you want to make sure you check him out and get an opportunity to coach with him as well. Also, we are joined by a woman who I am constantly inspired by. If you're on any sort of social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, you want to make sure you're following her. Stephanie LeBlanc-Godfrey is the global head of community inclusion programs for women of color at Google and the founder of Parenting Backwards. I know we have some New Yorkers in the building. Stephanie was born in Brooklyn, New York. She attended Stevens Institute of Technology and completed an engineering degree in electrical engineering before starting her career in the finance industry as an infrastructure engineer. She then pivoted her career to digital media, where she spent 10 years in advertising operations at major media conglomerates like Forbes, Fox, and NBC. So we have a wealth of experience with us today, and I just want to kick it over to our panelists to just say a little hello to you all and why this topic is exciting to them.
Thank you so much, Angelina, for inviting me to this conversation. For me, it's near and dear to my heart, being a D&I practitioner, but also in starting my career off as in the engineering field. It was lonely for a Black woman like me. And so the passion that I have and the work that I do to ensure that other Black women, other women of color don't have those same feelings of isolation and loneliness on their journey within their career really brings this full circle, because managers make or break your experience within a company. And that's why I pivoted out of the engineering field and went into digital media. So.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Robert, would love to hear from you.
Well, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, because as a formerly stressed out employee, you know what happens when you're dealing with a bad boss, a boss that is behaving badly. And so when I got the opportunity to work with people as a coach who were dealing with this on a daily basis, it was like I found my calling. So I'm really excited to talk about this and share some of the things that I work with clients to help them achieve.
Awesome. And I have to tell you, this one is an important topic to me, because for me early in my career, having a difficult manager was really the impetus behind me even thinking about starting a company, because I was so stressed at work. I said, I can't take it anymore. I want to be the kind of manager that creates a good working environment for everyone. And it really started me thinking about my pathway to entrepreneurship. Now, I know we have some folks that have just joined, so those of you, feel free to know that you can use the chat freely throughout the conversation, share any of the questions you might have with our panelists, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I want to just kick it off with some questions that I have for you before we turn it over to everyone else. And just for some context, in 2016, a Gallup poll found that only 18% of managers demonstrate a high level of talent for managing others. That means that over 80% of managers are not very good at leading people. What do you think this means for people entering the workforce and for those who are looking for management positions? How do we start to build a culture of better managers? So I want to kick it off there with Stephanie.
Sure. So, I mean, what does it mean for people entering the workforce? You are quite frankly entering a game of chance, right? There is a likelihood that the manager has the competencies that are necessary to meet the needs of you as their direct report, right? Who you are, what you bring to the table, where you want to go. But unfortunately, there's also an equal likelihood that managers are trying to balance company KPIs, team goals, thinking about their own career, managing day-to-day responsibilities. And so that connective tissue that needs to happen with their direct report can often, take a back seat. I remember in my first managing role, I was reading every leadership book out there. And I remember distinctly, the New York Times had this amazing column called The Corner Office that I would devour like every Sunday. But what was missing then and is missing now is this top-down investment in managers. I personally was doing the work of building up my leadership skills and competencies, but L&D, learning and development teams within companies, are often not focused on what are the hard and soft skills that managers need to be able to meet all the company goals, but then also support the talent which they are in charge of. And so that investment is critical to not only supporting the manager's maturity and balancing all the things and grooming the careers for the direct reports that they have as well.
And so you seem like the kind of leader that is investing in your management style, the kind that I'd want to work with. Robert, why aren't all managers doing this?
That's a great question. The question that you asked originally has a lot of different implications. I want to start there and then bounce back to this one. So the implications that this has for people entering the workforce is, the first and foremost, is that they need to be really good at their job. And I say that because that's the criteria that organizations are using to select managers. And which is really interesting, because that's a holdover from when most organizations were factories. They would take the person that had the best skills, and they would promote that person. However, those organizations usually had some kind of training program that would help that person reach that next level. Here's the ironic part. In the future, right now, what they did was they got rid of the training part, but they kept the selection criteria. So the implication for people coming in is they need to do what Stephanie did. They need to educate themselves. They can do that by reading, like she did. They can go back to school. They can get certifications. They need to educate themselves and find ways to put the skills that they learn into practice. And they can do that by volunteering for special tasks and assignments, stretch assignments, things like that. And that's going to do a couple of things for them. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to give them an opportunity to use the skills that they learn, so that when the time comes for them to get to that next level, they're not rusty. They know exactly what works and what doesn't work. It's also going to give them visibility, because they're doing that while they are working their current job. It's going to give them credibility, and it's going to show that they have initiative. So that's, part of that implication. And that's why a lot of these organizations are using an antiquated model to select their next level employee.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I think a good piece to highlight there really is that emphasis on, as you're considering, why am I not getting promoted? And I know so many of us have had frustrations when we've been in that spot. I'm contributing to the culture. I know I'm bringing about great things in terms of collaboration to my team, but how am I not being seen? It really is about striking that balance between bringing your work product to the forefront and then having that investment. And sometimes that can seem really backwards. So I'm glad you called that out. I know we have some questions coming in. I want to take another one before we get to some of those in the chat. When we think about a bad boss or a boss behaving badly, what does that actually mean? What does that 82% look like? What is a difficult boss? And, on the flip side, what did you learn in all your reading, Stephanie, that you can tell us about what really is a great boss and how we can be better managers?
Yeah, so for me, in my almost 20 years or so in the workforce, I have had no shortage of both like horror stories and then heartwarming stories within my career and having a great boss. And so a great boss, or even a great leader, I think has two of many qualities that really stand out to me. And one is that they are as invested in the business as they are in my success, as I define it, right? So they know my strengths. We talk about areas of opportunity. They want to know what I see in my future for my career, whether it's within that role, within that team, or is it outside of that, right? What's my purpose and passion? Where are my talents and what I'm good at? What does the business need? And helping me figure out what can carve out that space for all of those things to meet together, to really feel like I'm successful and I'm getting the most out of my career. And then they're creating opportunities for that growth to take place. That's great manager from a tactical professional development lens. The other piece of it that's really important is, that they create a psychologically safe space for you to share who you are in ways that impact your work. We talk ad nauseum about what it means to bring your authentic self. The truth is we're not always able to, depending on the environment that we're in, the team that we have, and most importantly, the manager that we report into. But it's really important that I'm able to share the pieces of myself that will impact the work. So for example, I'm a mom in corporate America, and I spent a lot of time early on hiding that aspect of myself. I was afraid of being stereotyped and sidelined for opportunities. And so I didn't share that I had kids, and people would be like, wait, you have kids? You never mentioned them. No, it's none of your business, because I'm too afraid of what the ramifications of that could be. And, the sign of a good manager is that they create the space, both proactively and genuinely, to make that connection, that I could share that part of myself with them. And the lesson that I really learned from that, and me, not hiding it and being proud and sharing it in not a way that I felt fear, was that if I don't offer up that pertinent information about myself, then I'm letting them create their narrative about who I am. That could go really well, or it could go really wrong, right? And so I had to really learn to take back that ownership of my narrative, so that they are clear on who I am, what my work ethic is, but also how my personal priorities intertwine with my work, and how I can create harmony between the two. So when work calls, that I'm able to be there, but they know that when I'm offline and dealing with my family priorities, that they are aware and know that it's not going to negatively impact work. And so having managers that can create that space to share that pieces of information is the sign of a really great boss and great leader.
Wow. So I'm hearing psychologically safe environments, creating opportunities for growth on the team, and really developing the true relationships with your people as all the elements of a great boss.
Yep.
Robert, what would you add to that list?
Oh, there's a lot that I would add to that list. As far as great bosses are self-aware. They're self-aware. They know what their strengths and weaknesses are. That's the starting point. They also, how should I say this? They also have a clear vision that they articulate to their team, so people know what they're working towards, what the team is working toward. A great leader will also, or a great boss will also, they also know how to motivate and inspire their people. And they do that by connecting the personal values of the individual to that individual's job. And when they do that, they let that employee know that they're not just working to further the aims of the organization, they're also working to further their career. Great bosses are ethical. You won't see them getting involved in any kind of illegal shenanigans or any illegal activities. They also treat their employees like individuals. They know the strengths, weaknesses of their team. They help those individuals shore up their weaknesses and help them leverage opportunities to bring their strengths into play. I can go on. And I think the last two things that I would add to that, great bosses create great leaders. They allow those individuals who are aspiring to be a leader to show their stuff. They get them involved in special tasks and projects and all those stretch assignments that come their way. And great leaders are not afraid to be vulnerable, letting their team know that they don't have all the answers, working collaboratively with their team to find solutions to some of the most complex problems that the team is going to face. As far as bad leaders go, we probably could talk about that for the rest of the panel, but bad leaders are quite the opposite. But some specific things that I've seen, bad leaders micromanage. They do that a lot. That's the only, usually their primary skill, right? They micromanage. They also are poor communicators. They give very little or no performance feedback. And if they do give feedback, it's usually bad feedback. They're vindictive, they have low emotional intelligence, and they're usually narcissistic. It's all about them. So that's how I would contrast those two lists there.
Oh, so many follow-up questions. And I love the list that both of you shared. One of the things that comes to mind as I hear from both of you, and we shared, this dichotomy. There's great bosses and then there's terrible bosses. But what I've seen and experienced often in the workplace is there's also all this space in the middle, right? Where, to your point, as you called out, Robert, people are getting promoted because they're good at their results and what they've produced. So then that creates this pressure to continue producing. Now, if I'm a high performer and I know that I'm rewarded when I produce, but I'm not rewarded when my team does well, or when I've grown my team, or they feel psychologically safe, what is then my incentive to aim towards being a great manager? And so I want you all to answer this question in two parts. One, how do we build and shift cultures where people see the need to develop their talent amongst all of the other competing priorities that they have to continue to be good contributors? And then if I am an employee and I'm sitting in that position with the manager who is not investing in me, so we'll skip from bad bosses now, but like, let's just say that mediocre manager not investing in me, how do I begin to find resources for myself? Robert, you can
Start by having a conversation with your boss. Start having that conversation. Let that boss know what some of your goals are. Have that open conversation with them. Get some strategic feedback from that boss. Work with them and find out, what things that you can do to impact your job right now, the things that you can do to impact your career. I think that's really important. Have that conversation with your boss, and that's a good way to start.
And Stephanie, if you could talk more about the culture, how do we shift culture to include the priority on developing talent at work and creating that good management environment?
Yeah, I saw someone write in the chat the word accountability. I mean, it's overused, but we still haven't nailed how to actually execute on that. But that's where it starts and stops. Managers do have a lot on their plate and have a number of competing priorities. But what they do get done is meeting their KPIs, right? And so if their KPIs are, revenue based or, whatever it is specific to your role in your industry, then there needs to be a people side to that. And so there has to be a top-down approach into how we're measured and what success means. And that needs to be expanded and it needs to be held at equal importance. And then also there has to, when we talk about professional development, particularly when, this minorities, critical talent, all the labels that they have for the amazing and well, suited Black and brown folks that are working in corporate America, they've got all the programs for us, but not for the managers. Let's be explicit, for the white managers that are managing us. And so even no matter all of the work and self-development that we do for our careers and for ourselves, if managers aren't tuned into what to look for and don't have blinders on and biases, flaring up, then it's what we do is for naught, right? And so we have to focus in with as much fervor as we do with our minority talent, with the managers who are then in charge of our perf scores and are sitting in calibration rooms and affect our promotion, that then affect our compensation, right? We have to invest in them because they are the ones that hold the cards in their hands for our career in many instances.
Whew. So much was said there, and I really appreciate that. What comes to mind as I hear this, and we talked about creating a shift in the culture and encouraging good management. We've also, as both of you have called out, had horror stories where we've been in that really difficult position. And I will just tell you quickly, one of mine, in my early 20s, I had my dream job at my dream company. And I came from an upbringing where I didn't have a lot of resources from a financial standpoint. And not only was that job something that made me feel like I had achieved the pinnacle of success, it was also a necessity for me to provide for myself and to start paying off my college debt. And yet every day I was going into the office with someone who harassed me, who would threaten me when we traveled, and who did things to intentionally diminish me at work and set up systems that made it difficult for me to be perceived as doing well at what I did. And that was very challenging for me. And there were moments where I wanted to quit, where I wanted to speak up, but there were two things that happened. One, my manager at the time was a woman of color, and I just had grown up in this culture of we don't turn our backs on each other. We don't, you don't tell on somebody else in your inner circle or your inner group, even if they're hurting you. And I really could not, I felt uncomfortable going to HR. And then the other piece was I needed that job. I felt like I needed that job and I didn't have any options. If someone was in the position that I was in, you know, and anyone who's in a really hard working environment where it's difficult to go to work every day, what sort of feedback would you tell them? Stephanie, I'd love to hear from the process standpoint as someone who has worked in people operations. And then Robert, you know, from the coaching standpoint, what advice would you give?
Yeah, so your story is familiar, resonates on both a personal level, but also a story that I've heard hundreds of times in my role within diversity and inclusion within people operations. Unfortunately, it's so common. And with all that you've mentioned, there's also this not trusting of HR that is also common in many companies, as well as the culture that we bring into corporate America, right? No snitching. They're one of our own. There's only a few of us. So what does it mean if we then kind of bring to light bad behavior on their front? I think what I've done in previous situations and advice that I've given is figuring out how to strategize. What is your strategy for getting out of this situation? Is there a person that's adjacent that you can tell that isn't in a position of power or influence that you can get their support to manage through it? Sometimes there isn't. And so you need to figure out, okay, I got to get out of here, but I don't want to just run, right? You've got financial obligations that you can't just be like, I'm out and just quit. And so you've got to figure out, okay, is it 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now that I'll be able to get out of here? And then what's my plan for exiting? You know, again, going back a little bit to the process side, organizations now are trying to figure out how they can either incorporate third party or just objective spaces where these stories can be shared, so that people can let their stories be known and then have support through that. But we're not there yet. That's just the reality of it. And so coming up with your plan, relying on your tribe, leaning on your tribe of mentors and sponsors and your peers who can offer you solid advice on what that roadmap could look like for making your exit in a way that's not a detriment to your finances, and in a way that you can have dignity when you leave. The most painful thing that I hear is when people feel like they are forced to leave a company and they leave in the darkness of night. They leave with their head held down, feeling like a failure. But to be able to be aware of the toxic environment that you're in and coming up with a plan to exit out of it is nothing short of being self-aware, being smart enough to not sit in it for any longer, and making a plan to get to a healthier space. That is a win, even if you are walking away.
Oh, absolutely. I wish I had you when I was in my early 20s to listen
Me
to.
too. Like Beyonce said, the woman I am now, the woman from my 20s wouldn't compare to it. So
Oh, absolutely. Robert?
Well, there's two ways to look at this, from an advice standpoint and from a coaching standpoint. And sometimes they intersect because as a coach, you know that we bring advice to things that we have experience with. So I'll start there. So first and foremost, the things that I would advise any employee that's dealing with a toxic situation is be professional. You don't want to get hooked into that by, exhibiting any kind of passive aggressive behavior, any kind of unprofessional behavior. That's the first thing. Then the second thing, do excellent work. And you try to do excellent work by trying to have feedback, getting feedback from your boss. What are their preferences? What are some of the things that you can do to make your work more palatable to that person if they're complaining about the work? The other thing is, talk to people that get along with that boss. what's the secret sauce there? How are they able to do it? Maybe you can add some of what they're doing to your strategies. Talk to your boss about their behavior. A lot of times we get caught up because we're afraid to have that conversation. And I think you had mentioned something earlier. There's a place in between that really bad boss and that great boss. Maybe that boss doesn't know that they're doing things that are offending you or making you feel that it's a toxic environment. So have that conversation. And then I'm going to start putting on my HR hat here. You're going to start documenting everything that's going on. You're going to document what they're saying in their words, not in, you don't write in Shakespearean prose if that person doesn't talk like that. Write the way they say it. You want to be very clear. You want to be detailed. You want to have dates, times, locations, who was in the room when it happened. And then you have a conversation with their boss. And I say you should do that after you try to have a conversation with your boss, because their boss is going to go to them and say, hey, such and such came to me and they're saying these things about you. And you don't know what kind of relationship they have with their boss. Maybe their boss is in league with them. Maybe their boss is coming down really hard on them, but doesn't correct their behavior. That's going to not bode well for you. Then if that doesn't work, then you go to HR. You have your documentation, bring that to HR. And I think Stephanie said it. Some people are reluctant to go to HR because sometimes HR doesn't do what they're supposed to do. I know that from working in HR for many years. And then unfortunately, the last thing is move on. You can try to get into a different department, figure out what your strategy is. Like Stephanie said, maybe the best thing for you is to go to another organization whose values are more in line with your values. That's what I would suggest from an advice standpoint. From a coaching standpoint, you want to assess the behaviors. You want to assess the specific behaviors that the boss is exhibiting, because that is going to be the touchstone of the coaching intervention. Then the second thing is really look at your stress level. On a scale from 1 to 10, what level of stress are you under and how often you're under that stress level? If it's a high level of stress and you've been under that stress level for a long time, we need to have a very aggressive coaching intervention. I also work with clients to find out how they may be getting hooked into that toxic relationship. Bad bosses are really skilled at getting people involved in their emotional drama. They've been doing it for years. They're expert at it. So I want to see how that person may be getting hooked into that drama, so they can get unhooked. We can remove those buttons. We can deactivate those triggers so they're not getting involved in that passive aggressive or confrontational behavior that's going to get them in even more trouble. And here's the thing that I like to ask after that is, what outcome do you want? What's the outcome of working with a coach? And when I ask this question, sometimes someone will say to me, I want my boss to leave me alone, right? And here's the thing, and this is an opportunity for me to challenge that assumption. A good boss shouldn't be leaving you alone, and a bad boss certainly will not leave you alone. What we're looking to do is change the quality of these interactions so your work can be productive and you can have less stress. And then we start brainstorming and strategizing for the specific strategies that we're going to use based on that information. And that's how we do it. And I want that client to leave that coaching session, even if it's the first day, with something they can put into action the next day, or even that very day if they're coaching with me during the work hours, because it's really important, especially if they've been under a lot of stress for a prolonged period of time.
I'd like to quickly just double down on something Robert said, which is around getting, and that's my kid in the background, around getting coaching support, right? Often people are trying to figure out at what point of their career, when you're going through these moments of, I wonder if, and is this all in my head? Is it me? Is it them? That's the moment to get the coach, instead of being in your head for, X amount of time, and then you're spiraling, and then you're seeing, physical and mental manifestations of stress. It's really important to be able to, use a coach to be able to validate what your feelings are, so that you're not internalizing it, and then be able to figure out what your plan is for it.
Yes, and I just have to say, you both were just dropping gem after gem. And when I heard you speak, Robert, I said, this is exactly what I mean when I say any coach that's on the C-Suite Coach Network, I would want to coach me. I mean, so much wealth of skill and information. So a friendly, shameless plug to you all to please do check out the C-Suite Coach Network. Jackie will drop the link in the chat again so you can have your coaching experience. And I also just want to come back to quickly the experience I described, because what they both shared, what Stephanie and Robert both shared, are some of the tactics that I took. And that is what helped me get out of that situation. One, I really worked on developing my network throughout the organization, and where I could, took on projects that would be evaluated by different teams. So my work product could really, I'd have proof points from different stakeholders that I was doing great work, and it didn't come down to just that person. I began to document everything that, set off my spotty senses, where it felt a little inappropriate, or it felt like, is this normal? Is this right? And I also engaged an executive coach. And so the reason why I want to bring that up is it comes back to what I was sharing of when I said I felt like I didn't have any agency. I felt like I couldn't leave because of my circumstances and where I grew up or how I grew up. And I had to shift that. And when I was working with my coach, it really helped me understand to stop looking at myself as all these things that I lacked, but really how to remind myself of everything I was bringing to the table. And once I understood the agency I had, then I used my network to help put into place the things I needed to make my exit strategy happen. So that was making sure I shared my skills, shared the project I worked with my network. So I wasn't, when I was ready to leave, just leaving a bad situation, but I was leaving empowered, and I had all these folks who were advocating for me in different places. So that would be my recommendations to you all as well. I do want you all to start putting your questions in the chat. I have a few more for you all. If someone is watching this and they realize that they themselves, they're hearing our conversation, they're managing folks, and they have some of these characteristics of a not so great boss, or they haven't been intentional in their management style and they're looking to change, where can they start to mend the relationships with their employees?
Yeah, I'd say resetting expectations, right? That vulnerability. I think there's something to be said around managers who can be transparent, be vulnerable, and then model the behaviors that they want, right? Like eating crow is hard for anyone. But there are ways to kind of work with your direct reports to repair those relationships, the same ways that you would put effort into your personal relationships are the same that you need to put into your working relationships. And so I think starting with resetting expectations, noting things that you have noticed about yourself that you want to change and engage with, and having that conversation, the amount of respect that someone would have for you to be able to call out those things that they are seeing and experiencing, and to hear the changes that you intend to make, is the first step. It is not the only step, but it is the first step in repairing that, and then holding yourself accountable, and now being held accountable by saying it out loud to someone else around, what's the work that you're going to do. And then getting coaching yourself, right? Getting the support that you need, whether it's classes, coaching, reading books, columns, whatever you have to do to work on and build up that muscle, those competencies that you need to engage with your direct reports in a healthy way, is a place to start.
I think a great place to start, first of all, they should congratulate themselves for having some kind of self-awareness. It takes a lot for someone to say, I've been really bad at this. I think that's the first place to start. And then sit down with your group and say, look, I went to a panel discussion and I realized that I'm not necessarily a great boss. And I want to have a conversation with you all to see what are some of the things that I've been doing that may be setting you off, that may be, hurting you, and have that conversation with their team and get feedback with them. Here's the caveat though. If they've been a really bad boss, their team's not going to trust them. right? The team is not going to say anything. They'll shake their heads and they'll leave and they'll say like, I don't know what that was about. That person's a liar or whatever. So another way to do it is take a look, listen to this, go over this, video a bunch of times. Look at what we're saying great bosses do. Look at those things, see if you're doing them. If you're not, start incorporating them into your daily interactions with your people. Over time, they'll start to realize that something's different. And you'll know because they'll comment about it. People like to do that. That's your signal that, hey, maybe now is a good time to sit down with these folks and say 2 magic words, I'm sorry, and then have a conversation with them about what you can do to make that relationship better.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. And please do continue to drop any questions or thoughts you have in the chat. I believe we answered your question, inclusive leadership. If there's a follow-up or any other thoughts, please drop it in the chat. Something else that I did want to bring up, because we saw a rise in this, or we see constantly a rise in the growth of Black-owned businesses, especially women-owned. And a lot of articles have attributed that to the challenges of corporate America and how hard it is to see ourselves properly included, to achieve that sense of belonging in corporate spaces. What advice, if any, would you give for someone who is thinking that I cannot deal with these difficult managers anymore? This is not for me. I may need to position myself to take a leap. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm loving that idea of folks leaving corporate America. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but like it's true, right? With all the work that is being done, we are still seeing abysmal numbers in leadership, in peers, right? We're often the only ones within our group, and there's only but so much we should continue to take. We are in a time where becoming an entrepreneur is even more possible than it has ever been before. And this is a mode of success that I want those who are, just entering the workforce, or have been in the workforce for 20 years, to reimagine what success means, reimagine what your journey is supposed to look like. It's not only that 9 to 5, it's not only working in corporate America for 40 years like our parents and grandparents did, but we can take ownership in what it looks like. And if corporate America is not giving us the respect and valuing what we bring to the table, then entrepreneurship is a way. But again, like you mentioned earlier, we have all this cultural baggage and obligation and things that we bring with us that we need to work through, quite honestly, before we can make that leap. And so that's why coaching, therapy, like talking to entrepreneurs, all of these things that you need to do to get your mind right, to figure out what the next step of your journey is. And so I encourage anyone who's watching to start that journey of self-awareness and just curiosity about what success means to you, not what success means to your mom and the expectations that she has, or to your family, or to the entire Black culture that often sits on the weight of us in terms of what it looks like to be doing what success looks like in that regard. And to just explore what something different can look like. And don't make any rash decisions. Again, it could take 6 months, a year, it could take 5 years. But I think when you open up the aperture for what is possible within your life, that, entrepreneurship could be that, or reimagining what intrapreneurship is, which is taking on leadership roles and having that entrepreneurial spirit within the company, and kind of reimagining that you're not just a worker bee, but that you have some onus and power and influence within the roles that you have within your company. But start exploring and start being curious.
I don't think I could say it any better than what Stephanie said, but I will add, invest in yourself. invest in yourself. Go back to school if that's an option for you. Go get certifications. Learn how to work with people. Learn how to do what you're hoping to do. Be really good at that. A lot of people, they get into entrepreneurship and it's just their passion, and that will carry you. But you have to educate yourself. That's one thing. Grow your network and get support. Also very important. If you can get a mentor, also important. I think those things are very, very important, but you don't always want to surround yourself with people that agree with you. And we have a tendency to do that. And when we do that, we only see things from one way. Don't be afraid to get advice from that person that you know is going to say, oh, that's not good. Ask them why. See if it's viable, and look at things from their perspective, because it's going to give you just a wider scope of perspective for yourself. And that way it's going to open up those blind spots that you may have if you're just getting advice from people that are going to tell you, yes, go ahead and do it. It's great.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of continuing to invest in yourself. I'd add just one more piece here. I always say, as a business owner, and again, C-Suite Coach is celebrating 6 years. I'm so grateful. As a business owner, I always say, I don't have a boss, but I still report to my clients, right? I still have people that I have to deal with. And that does occasionally sometimes mean I'm still dealing with difficult personalities. I'm still dealing with systemic racism. I'm still dealing with a lot of the challenges that I faced when I was internal and an employee. So where I think it's important to make the distinction, and it depends on what kind of business you have and the industries you play in, but learning to develop those skill sets that we've been talking about this whole conversation, recognizing your agency in situations. You can walk away from clients in the same way you can walk away from a job and find that right fit if you're feeling like you're in a situation that's mistreated. So learning your agency, learning how to document things, the skills of working with people, your quality work product, all of that, I would say, continues to apply whether you're working within an organization or as you're branching out and starting your own. We have some questions from those in the room. Dr. Trinace Richardson says, you mentioned soft skills not being as appreciated earlier. Sometimes we find bosses who are so concerned about being liked and are so inept at their job, they don't have the ability or capacity to lead, set vision, provide direction, guidance, and model excellence. How can we lead up in loose, unorganized organizations?
This is always an interesting one, and one that I learned later on in my career. So if this advice helps anyone earlier, there is a game to be played. You could decide to play it, or you could decide not to play it. And so for a while, for a period of time, I'm like, I'm just going to do what I have to do. And if they like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. Right. But that may not get you where you want to be. You have a boss that wants to be liked. What are ways in which you can do your job that then helps them look good, that you can hand them something that they can then share with their boss that makes you both look good, right? You've got to be really strategic. It's chess, right? What are the moves that you have to make that is going to get you to that win? When you have to engage with a manager that doesn't have the vision, doesn't have the skills, how can you feed it to them in a way that that they then feel like they thought of it and it's a high five and like, okay, I gave it to you now, please implement it, right? And so there's an opportunity to play in that space and kind of figure out if there is a way to kind of get your win and kind of help them get to where that they need to be. Again, that doesn't always work, but it's a place to start to see if that is something that can be worked out between you and your manager.
I want to add to that what she said, plus if that doesn't work, or I should say, and if that's, have that conversation with your boss about what's going on. We give a lot of airtime to the micromanager or the pace setting boss who's an expert at their field and only expects excellence from everybody else. But we don't give a whole lot of airtime to that laissez-faire boss that does nothing right? And they do nothing because they want to come off like they're a nice person. They don't want to correct people because they don't want to create any friction. And when they do that, they actually create friction because they are enabling a toxic environment amongst the employees. I myself was involved in a situation like that. And I had no choice but to confront my boss and say, listen, this is what's going on. I've sent you a complaint about it. I need you to do something. And the funny thing is, when I pressed that person, I said, I complained about this a year ago and you didn't do anything about it. Why? They said, I didn't want people to think that I was a bad guy. That's their exact words. And so I said, but it was okay for you to let them think that I'm a bad guy. I'm asking you to do something about this. And what we did was we actually got legal involved in that situation, and they took care of it. So they still kind of were separate from the situation, but having that conversation allowed them to do something that was beneficial to me, the employee.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we are coming to the close of our C-Suite Coach Chat. I also just want to call out the comment from Inclusive Leadership about how important it is to reverse engineer your exit plan. Start planning for it early if you are in that situation. You heard a lot of encouraging thoughts today about why you might want to enter your own space and re-envision your idea of what success looks like. So as we begin to close, I want to hear some final comments from our panelists, and I will just kick it off with one of my own. If any of you are in a situation where you are dealing with a difficult manager, or perhaps you're working with someone, you have a friend who's on the phone with you all the time about it, I would say really start to develop some balance in your life that can bring you joy outside of work. Please do heed the advice of all of our panelists, but I want you all to also recognize you're not defined solely by what happens in those 40 to 60 hours of a week where you're working. You should really also be making sure that you have some things outside of work that can offer you balance as you're planning your strategy out to exit that situation. And I also want to remind each of us, myself included, that we all have agency in our lives, and it is about empowering ourselves to plan to get out of situations that are toxic and unhealthy for us. Robert, and then Stephanie.
I would say just, focus on what your vision of your future is going to be. And then people said reverse engineer. How are you going to get there? Look at your goal and then look at the steps it's going to take to get there. On the way, pick up the skills that are going to allow you to succeed. Do great work because your reputation is currency, and that's really important. And I would start with that, and then the rest, deal with it as it comes.
For me, I would say lead with curiosity, right? Lead with curiosity in the conversations that you have with your manager. You may assume or know what's going on. But leading, I wonder if this is, can you share more about this to kind of put the pressure on them more, but in a disarming way, I think is really important. So leading from curiosity, both with your manager and then with yourself. And that leads to finding your why. Why are you here? What can you get from this experience? And knowing the whys of that will allow you to, in moments of crisis that you're having with a bad manager or just a toxic environment, that you know your why and you can figure out, all right, can I still survive in my why here, or do I need to exit? Or is the situation in such disarray that you need to really kind of speed up what your plan is for exiting? But if you don't know your why, you can sit in that moment of spiraling and not knowing anything, or not knowing what to do next. And so knowing your why can really ground you in good times and in bad. I
absolutely love that. And I will just close by bringing us back to our why. And the why for C-Suite Coach since 2016 has been about achieving equity in the workplace and business. And we are really, really grateful that you all joined us today. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists. We have Stephanie LeBlanc, who joined us from Google, which has been a great partner to C-Suite Coach over the last several years. Major thanks for your contributions today, Stephanie. And also to Robert, who I am so glad is one of the wonderful 10 coaches that are a part of the C-Suite Coach Network. If you or anyone you know is in a place of pivot or in that space where you think, I might need a coach, chances are you probably do. So you want to head on over to our C-Suite Coach Network, www.csuitecoach.com/C-suite-network, and make sure you sign up for a 15-minute free consultation with any of our coaches and start your coaching today. Thank you all, and please join our September C-Suite Coach Chat. More information to come.